Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever we find you in the world. Welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on IDAGIO, the place where classical music happens. IDAGIO is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music available to fans around the world. My guest today is a dear friend. His name is Mark Rucker. And Mark, the first thing I'm going to say to you before I even tell people what you do is you have an absolutely sterling reputation, and not everyone in our field does. And when I posted on social media that Mark Rucker was going to be my guest, all kinds of praise came showering in, but even unsolicited before that. I had the tenor Joseph Kalea back in the spring. And when we were talking about a Rigoletto performance, he said, well, you know that Mark Rucker is the best Rigoletto I've ever sung with.
Oh my
and
God.
I said, as a matter of fact, Mark is scheduled to be my guest. And John Andrea Nozeta, the conductor, conducted you, I believe, as Rigoletto as well. And he said that you're an outstanding colleague and performer. And Laurie Feldman, the stage director, wrote to me, Mark is an extraordinary man. And this is just three. I could spend about 20 minutes reading all of them if you wish. We could find out why you have this sterling reputation. So I'm going to start with this, Mark. You are, by the way, a baritone, an educator. We're going to get into that. Mark, why do you have a sterling reputation?
I have a lot of money. I pay a lot of people. No.
You have a clack in the business.
Yeah. I can't answer that. I have some very dear friends, and I've been one of those people that I believe in having a good time performing. So when I arrive to do a job, I'm looking to have some fun, and I think I bring that to a lot of people. So and I hold them very dearly. Not unlike yourself.
Yeah, thank you. That's genuinely how I feel about you and your beautiful wife, Sadie, and your dog, who one day I will meet, whose name is Tonio. Let's go right to Tonio now, whether he shows up or not. He's a recent arrival in your house. He's still a puppy. And he is what in America is known as a pandemic pooch or a pandemic puppy. In that many people brought a dog into their lives during the pandemic when it was at its worst. It's still very bad for billions of people in the world, but there are signs of improvement. What prompted you to get a dog?
Insanity. No, we've always loved dogs and we've always wanted one, but because of the career, it was hard to just travel and have a dog. So we kind of took advantage of the fact that we were locked in, and we wanted to get a rescue dog at first, but because of the demand, it was almost impossible to do that. So we decided, well, we'll just get a German Shepherd. I asked for a German Shepherd. We have to be maybe two of the stupidest people on the planet. Because we were going to get two, a German Shepherd and a Black Lab for my wife. We did find Tonio and both fell in love with him. We brought him, he was 2 months old when we brought him home. Now, what I hadn't planned on was that not only do you have to have them in your house, you have to take them out. In the middle of winter, I was going out every 2 hours so that he would not have problems with the house. As I think I've said before, I have not seen parts of my house at that time of night. So it was kind of impressive to see that. But anyway, but he has been a joy and a mess at the same time.
I ask this because I have known many people who work in opera who have dogs, and it is a responsibility. They are also a joy. I have known many opera singers who have traveled with their dogs. A lot of them get little dogs because they're more portable than bigger dogs. Tonio is already a big boy for a puppy, and he's going to get bigger. So his travel requirements will be different. I know that many opera singers take housing that's not hotels when they travel, and they sort of put up residence, and their dogs go with them everywhere. Have you dealt with colleagues, and you can name them if you wish and not if you don't, and their dogs, and have experiences with their own dogs? I don't mean stage dogs, but their own dogs.
Yeah, well, there's two that come to mind. One was Marcello Giordani. We were singing, I think it was Lucia together, and he and his really truly wonderful wife Wilma we were in rehearsal, and there was a little bag sitting off to the side, and I wasn't really paying attention to it, and all of a sudden I thought I saw it move. In which case, all of a sudden they unzipped the bag, and Puppy Duke was his name. He came out, brought his toys out, and sat there and played with his toys. Of course, I don't remember the rest of the rehearsal after that because I was too busy staring at him. When they finished the rehearsal, all I heard was Marcello say, "Okay, now it's time to go." He got all of his toys, the puppy, and took them back in to the bag. I can only live for the day I could get Tony to do anything like that. The other one was a case where I was singing, I think it was Pagliacci in Miami with Marquita Lister, who had two dogs. She had a Rottweiler and I think it's a small dog. I can't remember exactly what it was, like a Shih Tzu or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. But she traveled with these dogs, and we were staying in a hotel that was friendly to dogs. And they said, well, just if it does anything, you have to clean it up in the room. And they said, well, the first thing the Rottweiler did was to go to the bathroom in the hall, in the main hall. Martina was a wonderful singer, never missed a beat, said, oh, well, this is going to happen. I said, well, you won't be coming to my room. But anyway, so those are two that really kind of ring with me. But there are several people that have dogs. One of my favorites is actually Martina.
Martina Royo.
Yes. Martina,
about whom we will talk.
Shih Tzus. And I think one of the first times she came, she was in Grand Rapids, I think it was. And I was there too, I think doing a Rigoletto or something. And she came in and she had Poochie Poo, which was a little Shih Tzu. And if you know Martina, there's not a joke that she doesn't know, cold. But as I was listening to this great diva talk, my eyes kept darting down to the puppy, who was dragging himself along the linoleum floor. And I thought, I can't say anything about this. It may embarrass her or anything. And all of a sudden she looked down and she said, oh, his little rear end hurts. It's cold. From that moment on, Martina and I have been friends ever since, because I thought somebody that's that big a diva that can joke like that, I need to be around.
I've known many opera fans who have their dogs and travel with their dogs, and the dogs stay in the hotel rooms when the fans go to the operas. And if the fans are ring fans, so the operas are much longer, they'll often run from the opera house to the intermission to give the dog a little walk or something, and then run back to the opera house for the next 2 hours of Götterdämmerung. And they tend to pick names that are a little too obvious. The most famous dog name among all the opera dogs I know is Puccini, as in Pucci. And everyone thinks that they've invented that name, Puccini. And I said, well, I've said to everyone, can't you come up with another name? Well, really not. I said, how about Papigeno? And this is a tangent we can go on endlessly, but I can tell many opera dog stories. I'm just going to tell one that I was a participant in. we remember the great Welsh soprano Margaret Price. And Margaret Price had various beautiful golden retrievers. And one of them that she had when I was working with her was Contessa, an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous dog. And Margaret Price, how can I say this fairly, didn't trust every human, but she certainly trusted Contessa and relied on Contessa sort of like an emotional support dog. And Contessa knew that, and she was really a lovely dog. And we were doing Otello at the Met, and Placido Domingo was Otello. And Margaret Price asked me to stand in the wings with Contessa on her leash in such a way that during the scene where Otello is murdering Desdemona, Margaret Price could look in the wings for reassurance that she was okay. And Domingo knew about this, and he said it was fine. And I was standing there in the wings wearing a tuxedo. And all of a sudden, when Domingo, in front of an audience of 4,000 people, began to simulate the murder of Desdemona, Contessa began to pull and growl and bark. And Margaret Price, who was on her back, was trying to indicate to Contessa, it's okay. I'm okay. And when Margaret Price came off the stage, she said to me, I think my service dog needs a service dog. And so after that, Contessa did not live in the wings during the murder of Desdemona. But very frequently, not Desdemona, Contessa was in the wings for Margaret Price performances. And that was allowed. I knew Corelli just a little bit, and Corelli had a series of dogs, all of which had the same name. I'm suddenly forgetting the name, but it would be number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. And his friend, very good friend, was a doctor named Adrian Zornotti, who was medical director of the Met in the 60s. And he too had a series of dogs. And Dr. Zornotti put together a book called Operatic Dogs that were photographs and remembrances of singers, conductors, and their dogs. Rudolph Bing had dachshunds, for example. And I'm going to use a word, it's a clinical word in the dog world. He once said that these are the only bitches I like to talk to. But we're using that in the dog show sense, not in any other sense. But it is a wonderful, I mean, they're wonderful beings anyway. I don't have one since I'm a kid. I had one when I was a kid. And it's the only thing I really miss in my life. But I too, like you, when we don't have pandemics, travel constantly. And I just didn't think it would be fair to a dog. I would have to get home in time to walk it. And they need that reliability.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm a dog uncle. I look forward to meeting Tonio's dog uncle as well. If he comes in, by the way, let him come and say hello. Luca Pizzaroni, by the way, is a famous dog lover. He and his wife, Kate, and they travel everywhere with their dogs. And I wrote an article a couple of years ago about Luca and their dogs. And he said in all candor that they give him a lot more than he gives them. And that his continuity and his stability comes in large part, not completely, but in large part from the security and the regularity that these dogs provide. The fact that they need to be seen at certain times and have certain needs attended to means that it gives him structure. And his little dog, the Dachshund, likes to appear on stage and has appeared in the Salzburg Festival in Les City Figaro, where Luca played the Count. The bigger dog apparently is just happier to sit in his throne off the stage. But so anyway, when Tonio comes in, why Tonio, by the way? That's an opera character.
It is. We were looking for names, and we were thinking about like operatic names and things like that. And my wife would let me name him Iago. So so I thought, well, I've done Tonio a lot, and I think he's going to be a baritone. The first thing, of course, that happened after I named him Tonio, it came up with this high shrilling whine. And I thought, oh my God, he's a tenor. Oh.
Maybe Lucio.
But now he's found, because somebody said, oh, well, you know, he could be Tonio in Fils de Régiment. I said, no, I can't live with the tenor.
No.
So now he has found his voice, and it's a pretty robust baritone. So I'm quite pleased with that. So that's how we came up with the name.
I see. Lest our listeners have any doubt, Mark Rucker is a baritone. And I'm going to go further and say, and if you object to the term, tell me, you are a Verdi baritone, because that seems to be a category. This, of course, does not mean you don't sing other things, because of course you do. But Verdi baritone is sort of a prized territory, and it has connotations that go beyond just a certain group of roles. Can you talk about what you understand the Verdi baritone to be, if you think you are one, and even if you're not?
Well, I have been referred to that way. I tend not to refer to myself that way. I tend to refer to myself as a baritone who happens to sing Verdi. There is a special feeling about singing the repertory of Verdi for the baritone. You have to have a height to the voice. You have to have a warmth to the voice. So Verdi sits well with me. And since I'm not really that much of an acting comedian, I tend to stay with the dramatic kind of repertory. I have always been in love with Verdi in the music that we get to sing. The storylines in Verdi sometimes are somewhat interesting, but the music is always incredible. And he's very good to just about every voice type. You know, so that's how I got to start doing that way. I also started listening, I would say, to people like Warren.
Leonard Warren.
Yeah, and I thought he's got to be a freak because there is absolutely nothing that man couldn't do. I reference him. My father had who was a singer himself and a conductor, and my mother was an organist and an actual contralto. But he would bring these recordings home, and we had a breezeway, and you had one of those old console, not a Victrola, a Zenith record player. So I would fist through them thinking I was going to find some Temptation song or something. And then all of a sudden I came out with the sea shanty recording of Warren. And I started listening to that. And at that point I said, this is pretty good stuff. And then I heard him sing probably the most incredible Il Balen I've ever heard anybody sing. At that point, I started trying to do it. Yeah, I started to try to do it. Very unsuccessfully, mind you, because I was about 17 years old. But I kept going in that direction. And so every time I get up and sing anything, I think about him. And yeah, my wife says I wore it out.
Did you start, let's say, with Leonard Warren or anyone else, with the breathing, with the interpretation? When I think of Leonard Warren, I think of many things, but it's certainly the breath control.
He had incredible breath control. I think the thing that attracted me to Warren was not only that, but he had such a command of a line. I mean,
describe what you mean by line.
Well, I always think about it in terms of vowel to vowel. No matter what he's saying, it was just pure line. And I strive every day of my life to be able to do that. And that's what actually attracted me more. He could make numerous colors with his voice, but it was just the fact that he just was a pure singer.
So I guess I'm wondering, because I studied singing, but I'm not a professional singer. When you say that he can make colors, does one make colors or have colors in the voice, or both?
I think you develop them. And that comes from a lot of trial and error. When I'm singing a role, when I'm trying to sing a role, I try to make a color for the particular situation that I'm in. If I'm doing Rigoletto and I'm singing with Spot of a Chill, there's a different feel to that. When I'm singing at the end of it with Gilda Dying, there's a different feel to that, there's a different color that I bring to that. So that's, and I think that's important, because I think that's how you do, that's how audiences get to understand, even though they may not understand the language that you're putting forth. They can get a feel from the colors that you bring to it.
So Verdi himself, in writing his operas, described what he called a tinto, which is a color, a tone, a shade, that I think that was intended more for the dramaturgy. So that certainly Falstaff would have a very different color as in tinto than Simone Boccanegra,
right,
for example, or Otello, or Rigoletto, or all of them. But I think that Verdi put, as you were describing, all kinds of colors into each character, not just each opera. So
right.
that, for example, Rigoletto and Gilda has many colors in her voice. And what we're talking about here is a basically coloratura, lyric, soprano, but who has to do all kinds of things musically, vocally, dramatically. And yes, they are in the notes, but ultimately it's up to the singer, her coach, the conductor, maybe the stage director, to tease out those colors and figure out how to use them. Last week, my guest was John Andre Noceda, and he and I spent about 10 minutes talking about the character of Schaunard. And I point this out now because he's a forgotten character in the opera La Boheme, and yet he is a person too. And rather than talk about many of the more famous characters, I focused on Schaunard because it's a role that I teach to baritones, because it tends to get lost in it. Did you ever sing Schaunard?
I did not. I sang Marcello a couple of times.
Yeah.
But I always thought that actually Schaunard was the better role.
Why is that?
Well, because I think his music. I mean, first of all, Marcello is the only person in the opera that doesn't sing an aria. So that's a little deflating for anybody. But you couldn't possibly do this opera without Schaunard. He is sometimes he's the catalyst for things that happen in the opera. So I wish I had sung it, but I never got a chance to.
And I use this also to point out to singers, and I trust you do as well in your role as a wonderful teacher, that there are no small roles ever.
No.
And a lot of times people come in and think that, well, I only got Schaunard, or I only got Preziosilla, or things like that. They're all fundamental roles.
No, listen, I sang years ago. I sang with my dear friend Jay Bonnell in a production of Otello in New Jersey. It was Jimmy McCracken's, one of his last Otellos. And I didn't do Iago. I did, it starts with an M. I can't remember his name now.
We'll think of it too.
Yeah. But anyway, it's a relatively small part.
Not Rodrigo.
No. Oh gosh, I'll think about it in a minute.
Okay.
Anyway, Montano. Excuse me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, my wife on the side. I had accepted to do it because they said they're going to pay me $800. Sure. So, oh my gosh, great. And I thought, well, there's only 2 lines anyway. Okay, that's great. A little did I know that it was one at the very end that I had to wait around for. But I learned my lesson by not being prepared. Because I said, oh, this is a very short thing. I don't have to worry about it. I had actually sung in a small production of Iago. This is nothing. I'm not going to worry about it. Well, I got to the first rehearsal and screwed it up royally. That was a huge lesson for me, and I never arrived unprepared again. So, but no, I think I always think about it in terms of what that character is feeling, what that character is thinking about. No matter how small we conceive the part is, what would happen if that character wasn't involved? So
in this conversation, we're going to go back and forth between your performing career and your career as an educator. I should tell our listeners that Mark Rucker is a professor of voice at Michigan State University, and you are also the administrative director of the Martina Arroyo Foundation's Prelude to Performance Young Artist Program, which I've been honored to teach at and love every year attending the events in June and July. It'll be back next year, I know. This year is a pandemic year. And when you cast productions, well, explain a bit about the concept of Prelude to Performance. We'll talk about Martina Royal later, but the concept itself, well, how it's different from other young artist programs.
Right. Well, to talk about Prelude, you have to talk about Martina because it's all based on her. Martina teaches a class during the year, the role class, and in that they develop a character from beginning to end, and every facet of that character is done in that. So I was well before I got into Prelude, I was working with the wonderful Nancy Milnes on a program that she had called Aesop. And then I kind of got out of that because I was kind of tired and I was still running around singing a lot. And the minute I decided to stop, I got a phone call from Martina Royal saying, we're starting a new opera program. This was in 2002, I believe, or 2005, if I haven't been corrected. Well, the program is based almost entirely on her role class, but we bring other facets to it. We start with a libretto class where they just talk through the opera and learn it from beginning to end. We have a fight class, which is really kind of fun, where they learn how to walk on stage, they learn how to fall, they learn how to do all these kind of different things. We have language classes. We have two of the, well, we had, but hopefully they'll return. Two of the most ingenious men I've ever met in my entire life was Charles Kane, who was our costumer, and Steve Horak, who was our makeup designer. So it is a 6-week program. The first 4 weeks of it are dedicated to classes and learning, and then in the afternoon they have staging rehearsals. And then the last part of that is the performances. We go into the theater for the performances. We've done some fairly aggressive performances as far as a young artist program, but they get to do it. We only do things that are applicable for the singers that we have. And I will say one other thing about it is that we are one of the few organizations that go out for voice. We want the voice. We don't care what you look like. We want the voice. And we have gotten some wonderful talent that have come through the door and are now being successful in other places, like Ryan Speedo Green for one, and Maria Brea, who just finished the Cardiff. And there's many more of those people that have benefited from that program.
Cecilia Violetta Lopez, Mike Angelini, there are many.
Yes, yeah. Yes. And it was really funny because I got the opportunity actually to do a Rigoletto with two of the former Prelude singers. One was Violetta Lopez, and the other one was Won-Wee Choi, who are both singing very well out there. And I got more of a charge out of doing that performance than I think I got out of doing any performance I had before, because it was just a thrill for me.
So a question I have that I've never asked someone who runs a young artist program before, especially this one where you do full opera productions, do you decide on the opera and then hear your applicants and decide which 30 or so singers you're going to take into the program? Or do you hear and pick your 30 singers and then say, okay, now that we have this group, we look like we have a Violetta, we look like we have a Germont, and then say, okay, we're going to do Traviata? What comes first?
Yeah, it's the latter. We actually decide the opera, and then we advertise that we're doing the opera, and then we're going to work on it, and then we will hope and pray that certain people will walk through the door. We decided to do Traviata, and two wonderful sopranos walked through the door. We decided to do Butterfly. The whole cast came in. I mean, we've been very lucky, I should say, about that. We decided to do Hoffman. We've done Hoffman twice, actually. The first time we did Hoffman, we had two Hoffmans. We had one that did the postlude and the prelude, and then the other one did the three stories. Well, this time, in walked One Wee Choi, and he had actually been in another production with us before as a kind of character tenor. And he came and he said, "I want to sing for Hoffman." And I said, "Oh," he meant the three character voices. He said, "No, Hoffman." I said, "Okay, that's a little nuts, but okay." Well, certainly he did it and was fantastic. So we've been very good about being able to cast things. The biggest thing is that we do not cast. This is extremely colorblind casting. So for our Butterfly, Brandy Sutton was our Butterfly. For the Pinkerton was I'm losing his name, but he was an Asian.
I remember. Yeah.
And on and on. So we cast that way, and we're not inhibited by the thought of, well, he's got to be a certain thing or she's got to be a certain thing. She's got the voice for it. We're putting it on.
Mark, I guess I'm about 98 or 99% in favor completely of colorblind casting. Are there any roles in any operas that you can think of that perhaps there should be some awareness or alertness to a person being of one color, another background?
Very few, actually. I've done Iago, and actually I don't believe there's anything in the piece that says what he is, other than, Othello is a Moor. I don't think so. People sometimes will overdo Aida, as if, the Ethiopians are black and the Egyptians are all white, which is amazing to me.
If they're not all white.
yeah, which has always been somewhat amazing to me. I think, if you were going to, people have different opinions about this, of course, but I will do my makeup so I look as close to a character as I can get. And people say, "Oh, well, you shouldn't do that." Well, I do, and I think some people that do Butterfly ought to try to look like the character as close as they can get. I still think opera is about the music.
I certainly agree. When I worked at the Met, this is quite a few years ago now, when I was just beginning, there was a new production of Ballo and Maschera, and the producer was the son of Delmonico, Giancarlo Delmonico, and one of the conspirators was a Black artist, and Delmonico wanted him to basically put on what looked like rice flour and look very white, because it was set in Sweden. This was a Swedish version, not a Boston version. And Delmonico insisted, in fact, and the artist complained correctly, I agree. And I was called in the middle of it, and I said that we can do makeup in such a way that we're not putting masks on, makeup masks, but that are suggestive. It's kind of like when Othello, in the era of John Vickers and early Placido Domingo, really was shoe polish black, which was completely wrong and unrealistic. But then Domingo, as he progressed in the role, his makeup lightened so that he looked like he was from North Africa.
Right.
But had not fallen into shoe polish, basically.
Right.
And this artist he did object. And what we finally did was we picked a white wig, because the conspirators in the 18th century would have worn white wigs. And he had a white wig, and the other characters had white wigs. And the other conspirators, we understood that that's who they were. And it was a Solomonic solution I'll take credit for, but it was very thorny because this Mr. Delmonico just didn't see it that way. And he said that he was not a racist, but that it would, quote, not be believable. And it raised, we're talking about 1982, 83,
Right.
very important issues that were just not part of the daily dialogue almost 40 years ago, and are still things that need to be addressed now. But that I'm glad we shared that opinion. I knew we shared that opinion, but I'm glad that we can talk about it publicly. In America, on this coming Sunday, it's Father's Day. And part of why I asked you for today was because you have sung so many Verdian fathers. And I wrote down just about 20 minutes ago, just before we began, so about 40 minutes ago, all the fathers I could think of in Verdi, and you've sung some of them. Rigoletto, Amonasro, one that a lot of people don't think of as a father, but I do, Renato in Ballo and Maschera.
Sure.
Is a father, and I was reading up about him recently in an Italian book, and they said that he was not a father, which surprised me because when he forces his wife Amelia to basically abandon their child, that's fatherhood. Philip II is a father. Simone Boccanegra to me is a wonderful father. Giorgio Germont is both a father and paternal to the woman who was not his daughter. Ford in Falstaff is the father. Miller is the father of Louisa. Nabucco has at least one daughter, Finena, and maybe Abigail. Francesco Foscari, and I just wrote these out in my bad handwriting, is the father of Jacopo. The Marchese di Calatrava in the Forza del Destino is the father of Leonora, and he goes pretty quickly. Almost. But had he not accidentally been shot, we wouldn't have had that whole opera. And then one of my favorite lesser performed Verdi operas, maybe you'll do this when you're with Martina, is Giovanna d'Arco, Joan of Arc.
Oh, yes.
And Giacomo the Shepherd. It's a wonderful opera. It's not the easiest role to sing, Giovanna d'Arco. And if we're looking for making sense, it doesn't make sense, but it's a fabulous opera and it's Verdi. But then I wrote down the names of 4 other characters that I want to ask you about. And if they're fathers and it's not discussed, and if they're not fathers, how would they be different if they were? And the first one is Iago.
Iago, that's a good question. I don't believe he is. At least I should say it like this: I don't believe there are any that he would admit to. But because he's mostly about power, and I have never read anything that actually would give me the idea. You may have. I just have not read anything.
I haven't, but when I coach singers and I direct, I always try to have them think about the backstories that we may not know, because it leads to decisions about how roles are performed. And we don't know if Iago and Emilia have a child.
Right.
They have a troubled marriage. Emilia has divided loyalties, understandably. But if Iago were a father, would he be a loving, tough father? Would he be an awful father? Would he be a non-present father? It's not that they're definitive answers, but I always like to think about them.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of those things where he would be the kind of father that would be interested in what his child could do for him, not necessarily what he could do for his child.
So a Trump kind of father.
Yeah, indeed, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Not that I get political, but that one is pretty clear.
Yeah, that's a pretty safe one. Yeah.
The Iago organization.
Indeed. Yeah.
So the next one I would like to think of as a father, I think he would be a delightful father, is Falstaff.
Well, I think he'd be an incredible father, actually. I should premise that by saying he it's hard to distinguish that kind of father from Ford.
Ford being the husband of Alice and the father of Nonetta.
Right.
Yeah.
Ford is a father that everybody wants to have. Falstaff is a father that almost nobody knows they have.
In more ways than one.
Indeed. So he's another one of those kind of guys. I think that he probably has a whole lot of kids somewhere, but I don't think he has it. At least I haven't read that.
Then the character known as Don Carlo, the King of Spain in Ernani.
Oh,
what I find interesting in the opera Ernani, which I love, is Verdi's fifth opera. I think it was a huge leap forward for him as a composer. And I think that it is the template for much that followed, not operas such as Nabucco and I Lombardi, which are wonderful early efforts. But I think that his fifth opera, Ernani, created the structure that we see in Trovatore and Rigoletto and a lot of other operas, except that there are no kids involved, to my knowledge.
No, not to mine either.
It's just three guys competing for a woman, but with magnificent music.
Yeah. It's one of the few roles I haven't sung, but
because he is a king.
Yes.
And
so you would think that somewhere down the line there is.
He's sired, that's part of the king's job.
Right. But I have not confirmed any kind of presence of.
Yeah. And then finally, I think you know what's coming, Macbeth.
Right. Yeah. The father nobody wants.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the mother, for that matter, nobody wants. It's interesting because you would think of all people that he would want a child. But I don't believe she actually had the capacity to do that. But you would have thought that he would have, in that progression, he would have said, well, we need to have a child, kind of thing. But I think that their desire for power probably would have trumped it anyway. No pun intended.
There is a child in that opera. It's the son of Banquo.
Right.
Who is murdered as everybody is murdered in that opera, practically. Yeah. But a number of years ago, the actor Ian McKellen, and maybe to this day, takes out a show when he's between roles called Acting Shakespeare. And he does a presentation in which he recites famous monologues and so on. But he also talks to the audience about the characters and so-called the meaning of Shakespeare. And he would pose a question for the audience, namely, can you name any happy couples in Shakespeare? And people would say, well, Romeo and Juliet. And we'd say, well, that lasts about a day and a half. And you name other happy couples, and no one could really come up, because part of Shakespeare's conflicts of Beatrice and Benedict and so on, there's conflict. And right. I raised my hand and I said, the Macbeths. And Ian McKellen looked at me and he said, I've never thought of that. Unto themselves, they are a happy couple. They have their own desires, their own ambitions. They tend to be on the same page about all kinds of things. And I think of them as a happy couple for whom things go wrong. But do you think it's a good marriage?
I think they love each other. I think that their approach to success is quite different. Had it not been for her, how much of a king would he have been? What kind of king would he have been? Because he's still a warrior, he's still a soldier, and that part of him is very important. So, yes, I mean, when he comes home, when they do their first duet, I mean, it's a joyous occasion. They're both very excited about it. She a little bit more than he, I think. But so I think you could be a very strong case for that. Sure.
So now let's go. These are the presumptive or maybe not fathers. to some of the fathers you've played, because Mark, more than a few people have said to me that you're the best Rigoletto they've ever seen and heard.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Not just one or two, and not people you've claimed to have paid, but not everyone, but so many people basically say to me that you own the role of Rigoletto, or you have it with you a lot of the time. Talk about how you developed the role. Talk about who you learned from to unlock things in the character. Just talk about Mark Rucker's Rigoletto.
Well, I first got a chance to do Rigoletto in the Maryland program, the San Francisco Opera program. And up until that point, I had no idea what it was. But I think of Rigoletto as being probably the easiest character for most fathers to understand. Why does he do what he does? Why does he, why does the story end the way it does? You can make a case for maledizione, but I think it ends the way it does because he's a father. He is above all a father. Now, he's not the kind of ideal father because, he's using his daughter to try to get ahead. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a hard role to kind of develop. It was the deformity of this character is both mentally and physically a reality.
Namely that he has a hunchback.
He has a hunchback. He's also, as a result of that, he is a jester because people with deformities didn't get too many chances at success. So, and he gets to be friend the one person he winds up trying to kill. But that's how his power was there. So it's an unusual part for Verdi because you can see the justification for that. If my daughter come in late one night and I open the door and there she's standing with the Hell's Angel, I'm probably going to be concerned about that scenario. No, nothing bad to the Hell's Angels, but you get that feeling of sheer protection. That is what that character is. It's decidedly different than Amonastro, because Amonastro is a king, and he wants what he wants, and he wants to defeat, and he wants to be great, and he wants to be a king. And his daughter, who he hasn't seen in quite a while, Aida, is getting in the way of that. I think the one thing he gets so insulted by is that she would not be totally ready for what he wants to do.
So I'm going to interrupt you just because we're going to get to Amonastro, but there's one thing about him. I think Verdi was as near to perfection as an opera composer as we can get, even more than Mozart. Other people may say Mozart. But if I had the chance to meet him, I would only ask him about one thing in his entire output that I think he could have improved on. And that's a line in Amonastro. It's Amonastro. Yeah. And specifically when he's brought in the second act in the triumphal scene, having been captured by the Egyptians, and Aida says something to the effect of "Tell me, padre," oh my goodness, it's my father, and he says very loud, "Non mi tradir," don't give it away. But he says it so loud that everyone in Egypt has heard that. Right. When you do that, has that crossed your mind? Or
all the time. But I think that's one of the things that I try to do with it is that's a color. Obviously you have to say it loud enough for the public to hear you say it. But I use a different color. I don't go, non mi tradir, it's more, non mi tradir. will still fly out, but it sounds like I'm trying to have a side. But you're absolutely right. I mean, they would be kind of morons if they didn't.
I mean, what was Verdi thinking? my hero, and but just at that moment, I mean, every other single thing in Verdi, even if I don't get the choices initially, when I study them, then I understand what he was after.
Right.
This
yeah,
case,
no, I thought you were going to say that somewhere wrapped in a fish, there's going to be an aria that has Amonasro's name on it.
No. No. He's there to move the plot.
He is indeed,
I think.
Yeah.
But let's go back to Rigoletto, because I think there is no better opera than Rigoletto in the world. There are others as good, but it's perfect. And you know that I wrote the textbook Americans Used to Learn Opera, Opera 101, and the first opera I teach is Rigoletto, because if someone sees that and he or she is not moved, then they're just not going to like opera.
No, absolutely right.
It's lost. So I can try, but if they can't fasten on something in the opera Rigoletto, then it's lost. But the character Rigoletto can be played in so many different ways, and we're not talking about the productions. And I've seen beautiful ones and I've seen stupid ones, but let's assume it's a good, straightforward production in which the performers are allowed to be their characters as written by Verdi.
Thank you.
What I'm not going to ask a specific question. Talk about who he is to you and what you have found in him, living with him through the years and performing him often with many different artists as your colleagues.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's kind of one of the things that has helped me develop this character to the way I tend to play it, is different colleagues. How does a colleague react to what you say? Because I think this is always a part of reacting, listening. I think that's what makes a good actor, is an actor that a person that can listen. So you get a reaction from a soprano, it brings a different reaction to me. But I'm always still looking at it. I'm always trying to find something else. It's an easy thing just to say, okay, well, I'm just going to play it every time the same way, and that's what you're going to do. I try not to be that character. I try to find something different in there that I can put out. I think the first time I did it, I was thinking of Quasimodo.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that was what the character was. He was a hunchback. He had a big old hump in his back. And of course, back when I first started doing it, the humps were gigantic.
Yes.
And that became more of the character. So, I mean, I think this character could be not necessarily have a gigantic hump. I think he could be emotionally stunted. I think he could be, he could have like a cleft mouth or something. I mean, something that's just out of the ordinary. But the biggest thing is that he's human. And the reality is that he is a father, and he is dedicated to his daughter up to a certain point. He is dedicated to the life that he thinks they could lead. And every father, I think, makes a mistake with their daughter. I don't care who they are. I say, I have a daughter that I cherish more than life itself. And if I thought somebody was going to hurt her, we'd have a problem. Mm-hmm. So the thought that somebody would take my daughter and rape her would probably drive me to do almost the same things he did.
Especially if it's your boss.
Especially, yes. Yeah. You have no other alternative. Now, I would think that a 20th century woman would not do what she does at the end, but you could see that and I didn't have that at first, because I didn't have this daughter. That came to me a little later on.
There are very simple lines. Libretto, for the most part, is very direct, conversational Italian. There are a few older flourishes, but it was a breakthrough opera in a way that Traviata then picked up on, of being not florid Italian, but conversational Italian. And one of the strongest lines, not only in that opera, but all of opera for me, is when Verdi talks about his daughter and says, "E tutta la mia famiglia," she's my entire family.
Yes.
Because we know that his wife, her mother, has died, and she's everything. And I've seen the character played that he's a little too protective, a little too fawning. There are suggestions made of incest, which is something I don't buy at all. But I've seen productions like that. I think a problem in all of Verdi, and maybe especially Rigoletto, is that stage directors outside of Italy are embarrassed by the emotions, and they don't want to deal with the history and the social issues. So we know this is Mantua 1485, and it's very specifically that place and time. And if it's updated to be Las Vegas 1960 or New York Lower East Side 1950 or things like that, you're imposing other values on what Verdi was very specific about. Even the music, some of it sounds very courtly, and the music would not play in a jukebox on the Lower East Side in 1950. It is of its time and expresses something of its time. But I was very fortunate to learn the opera from Tito Gobbi, who was my teacher. And Tito liked punning a lot in Italian. And in Italian, gobbo means hunchback. And his name was Gobbi, which means hunchbacks.
Yeah.
And I would say, "Buongiorno, Tito Gobbi," and he would say, "Basta uno, one is enough." And he told a story that was very funny, that it was very soon after World War II, when Italy was financially on its knees and trying to get up and running musically and culturally and economically. And while something like La Scala could produce a grand production, he was working in a very regional theater. And they did operas basically based on what costumes they had. And they would, reuse a costume from one opera for another, so that you couldn't do Rigoletto and Traviata at the same time because it's such a different look. But he once told me that you reminded me, this huge hump that he had on his back. He said that when they then did Cavalla di Rusticana, they used it as the belly to make Santuzza pregnant. Said, "Abbiamo preso da qua fino a qua."
I've never thought about having that on my back like that, but
But it's a delicate question I'm about to ask, but I think it's important. We, as a profession, and you and I personally, speak about issues of race and identity and so on. But one, and that's important to do, but one that still has had its own conditions is what we call disability, which is a fraught term. And there are many opera characters who have their disabilities, and it's part of their story, so to speak. And I have seen directors and companies minimize or eliminate these disabilities, which tends to undermine the characters, so that I've seen a Rigoletto just walk around with a cane and not have any hump on his back. I have seen characters who are supposed to be mute, like Toby in Menotti's, I'm suddenly forgetting, but we know we mean, the medium, not be mute, which ruins the whole thing. And I don't believe that we can or should simply cancel these things, because it's almost pretending that people with disabilities don't exist. I've had my injuries. I've used a wheelchair at times in my life, and I get that. And I know what it's like to be treated that way. You're considered less intelligent, less able in other senses if you're in a wheelchair. And it happens. That's just a reality that some people express, not all. And do you have any feelings, Mark, about how certain opera productions and companies and administrators are addressing the disability of existing opera characters, not new ones that are created now?
Yeah, I think you have to go with what the composer and the librettist wanted. It's yes, you could do Rigoletto as a having a bad leg. I think one time City Opera did one with the baritone was in a wheelchair. I mean, you could do that, but the stigma behind a wheelchair, as you were saying, it can be problematic, but it pales in comparison to what a deformed person of a hunchback would have been like during the time of Rigoletto. There was no chance of you graduating out of college and getting a good degree and working on Wall Street, and that didn't exist then. Mm-hmm. If you're in a wheelchair now, I mean, one of my favorite violinists in the world was in a wheelchair. It didn't take away from him being a success. That's the problem when you start to do these. I did a Rigoletto one time where he was an agent, mm-hmm. And it was fine. It worked. But I demanded that he be an agent with a hunchback.
But he was 15. He was only 15% disabled.
Right. So I think you do have to. It's very difficult to. It's first of all, I think it's very difficult to update something anyway. I think you have to. I remember talking to Jonathan Miller about the Rigoletto, and as you mentioned, because I thought it was very impressive. But there was one thing that I thought was missing. And he said to me, he said himself, "You're talking about a maledizione." And I said, yes, because some reason it didn't make sense to me that a person in 20th century would care that they just got cursed. Mm-hmm. But certainly at that time in Italy, that was huge, especially that this was a father and he was being cursed by a father.
Well, it still exists in certain cultures. I can tell you very specifically that I have a friend who is, I guess, now about 70, who lives in a rural town in southern Italy. He is a very educated, cultured man, a poet of national fame and so on. But his late mother was a very traditional, rural, impoverished southern Italian woman raising her son on her own. And she believed in curses, and she worried that her son would be cursed. And I was once allowed to watch her perform a sort of ceremony in which she lifted the curse from her son. And he didn't believe in this stuff, but he did it to let his mother feel that she was involved and responsible and so on. And it involved taking a bowl of water and then some delicious olive oil, which why waste the olive oil on pulling up the curse? And then taking scissors and cutting the olive oil, and you would see how the oil dispersed into the water. And if it did in a clean way, the curse was done. If it was not done in a clean way, then you had to bring in someone else. And who do you bring in? I'm not making any of this up. You bring in a woman who had had twins, because apparently they had more power to lift the curse.
I've heard this before. Yeah.
And I watched the whole ceremony, and the mother incantationing, if that's a word, I just invented it, and putting some of the oil on her son's forehead and all that. It was fascinating. And we're talking about 1997 when I witnessed it. So we're not talking about ancient history. No. And I think that the power of myth and the power of curse and the power of curses if we accept them, and the power of belief can be brought into the current age. But very specifically, the alla maledizione, the curse in Rigoletto, as a dramatic device, does require suspension of a certain amount of credulity. Just like in Tristan and Isolde, the same thing.
Right.
But
right.
Wagnerites never complain about that. We Verdians, I'm both Wagnerite and Verdian, but when I have my Verdian hat on, we're a lot more critical. I find that audiences who love Wagner are a lot more indulgent and grateful and so on. Is that your experience?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the when you start talking about things like Dutchman and that kind of stuff.
Well, he was the next guy I wanted to ask you about.
Right. Yeah, you get a different sense from the people that love those, than Verdi. And sometimes people think Verdi is a little bit more real than some of the Wagnerian characters. Whether that's true or not is.
Well, some of the characters in Wagner have these mythic dimensions. Let's talk specifically about the Flying Dutchman. I love that opera. I adore that opera. I adore almost all of Wagner. You, as I ask all of my guests to do, gave me a list of performers, and one of the ones you gave me was Simon Estes, who sang the Flying Dutchman, specifically the aria Die Frist ist And do we think of him as a bass? I mean, the character, not Simon Estes.
Or bass baritone? Generally, well, I sang the character.
Yeah, I know.
But he is probably closer to a bass baritone. And it was I enjoyed singing it, but I probably didn't do it the kind of justice that Simon did, because Simon had just an enormous wide range of voice, and he had been a Wagnerian singer for quite a while, but I think he's a bass baritone.
And the character, give him some adjectives. Talk about the Dutchman and who he is and how you approached him and how you played him.
I watched a lot of Simon Estes. It was curious. I had first been asked to do it, and I turned it down. Because for some reason, I couldn't come to grips with not thinking of Wagner and Hitler. In doing Tannhäuser or things like this. I've done Tannhäuser before. I turned it down. No, I turned it down actually before I heard it. And so once I was doing Tannhäuser, I had decided to talk to a rabbi and say, listen, tell me what I should do here. I wouldn't sing anything written by David Duke. Why would I this, So then he said, well, to be quite honest, if you sing things only written by the good people, you're going to run out of repertory fairly quickly.
Just Verdi.
Yeah, yes. So I said, got a good point. So I listened to the music and I thought, wow, this is actually quite beautiful. And I think of Wolfram is a lyric baritone. Because I always thought singing Wagner was the big voice stuff. And you had to scream your head off and knock heads up, but that was certainly not the case. The Dutchman was really wonderful to do because it took me out of my comfort zone. The first aria you have is a scene by itself. I mean, it's a huge a scene, and it carries with it an enormous amount of colors. Now, we talked about that before, that you have to make this work. And it took me, I was very careful with that role. And I actually did talk to Simon about it. And Simon said, it's terrible. But he told me that in his preparation for it, he just looked at the words. He just That's all he did. He didn't worry about the music. He just looked at the words and figured out what this man was all about through the words of the piece. And I took that very seriously and did almost exactly the same thing. Although I will admit that I got to the music a little faster, probably, because if I study a new Verity role, I've got an idea what that music is going to do, how that progression is going to happen. I've sung so much in the Verity, but that was the difference for me, was the intent on finding out, this person's been on a boat for how long?
7 years.
Right, and he has to, and what he does at the end of it doesn't match with any kind of concept I would think he would want to do. What did he give up to do what he does? And so I'm always looking at characters like that. Even when we think of as bad characters, like Iago, I always think, okay, there's got to be something about this character that makes sense and it justifies what he does. And then you finally get that through the Te Deum. Through the Cradle. Thank you. But the Efficiency is the same thing. You get that. You all of a sudden get the development of that, what that man's all about. So
I grapple endlessly with Wagner, not about his having been a bad person, because I agree, then we'd have to leave out Chopin, we'd have to leave out Stravinsky. There are all kinds of people we'd have to leave out, and I don't do that. I see that as part of the package, and we could understand them that way. But I think that many of the characters Wagner created, are so complexly, fascinatingly human that we can live with them and think about them for a long time. The Dutchman is a problematic character to me, and when I've worked on the role with singers, because I think he could be portrayed as being very selfish. And if he is very selfish, then why is he an anti-hero? Why would an audience pull for him and want him to finally get what he's been seeking for all these years at sea? On the other hand, is Senta, the woman who sacrifices herself for him, does she have a death wish from the beginning to get out of Norway?
Right.
By any means necessary?
Yeah.
Or does she genuinely believe that it is her role to save a man, which is problematic in our modern times, although fascinatingly operatic in other times? Gilda does the same thing. She sacrifices herself to save a man who's even worse by a long shot than the Dutchman. And so therefore, again, it's an issue of who your colleagues are and your stage director and your conductor as it's formulated. But when you have played him, did he have what you would consider any good human values, or was he really selfish?
Selfish is an interesting term. I think he justified himself. So I'm not sure I think of him necessarily as a selfish individual. I think he certainly could be conceived that way. I think he certainly has things in the opera that he does that would conceivably be selfish. That he would throw away just about everything else to get what he wanted. But I don't necessarily think of him as completely selfish. He, just by the end alone, I mean, would lead you to believe that wasn't necessarily the case. And again, I think it's a little bit dangerous to bring in a 20th century ideology to something like that. So I don't think of him as being necessarily selfish.
Okay. So any other Wagner roles I've left out that you've either looked at or have played that I'm not covering?
No, I've only done two. There was the Wolfram and the Dutchman. And I did enjoy doing them, but I just am more comfortable in the Verity.
Well, Wolfram is a wonderful character. He is in some ways the moral center, along with Elizabeth in the opera Tannhäuser.
Absolutely.
And he is very sacrificing for his friends. He's ridiculed by Tannhäuser, who should really be grateful to him, because Tannhäuser says, in effect, you don't know what love is. And
Right.
the perception in Wolfram's mind of what love is very noble and idealistic. It's not as down and dirty as what Tannhäuser is after.
Right.
I think that Wolfram, in a way, is the teacher and the spiritual guide in the opera.
No
and
question.
He does have the best music.
He does. Which is not always
the baritone can walk away with that opera, even though, I mean, Tannhäuser, the tenor role, is one of the hardest roles anywhere. Elizabeth is a wonderful role. It's one of my favorite roles in all of opera. And not just the famous aria Dich teure Halle, but the whole role is really fantastic. And it's the opera that I never get enough of and would happily see anytime, but it's not done very often. And when it is done, the stage directors feel they have to gimmick it up.
Right.
And,
right.
Set it in O'Hare Airport. I don't know if you ever saw that production.
No, I didn't, but I don't think I
want Opera Chicago, they set much of it in O'Hare Airport, which just didn't make sense. Let's go back now to Verdi for a little bit with Amonasro, and then there's another Verdi character I want to get to. Amonasro, you began to talk about him, definitely has an agenda. Is he a good father?
In his eyes, he probably thinks he is. But I think fatherhood itself is not his primary objective. Saving his country is his primary objective. And so if using his daughter is going to help that happen, he'll use anybody, to make that happen. He may also be the stupidest character in opera. I mean, finding out where exactly these people are going to be, how they're going to be there and everything, and knowing he doesn't have the forces to do anything about it, he still goes and does it. That doesn't seem to be the most. He announces what he's going to do.
I know.
But he's not the kind of father that would say, hey, Caitlin, listen, Aida, let's sit down. Let's just talk about this calmly. And this is what I think you should do. Oh, you don't want to do it? Well, let's talk about it. Let me convince you how to do it. That's not him. He becomes enraged when she says, well, I don't want to do this. Of course you want to do this. Mm-hmm. You should want to do this more than me. You've been locked up with these people for, years. You should want to do this more than me, but you don't. And so he becomes enraged. And that is the biggest orchestral moment of the entire opera, is that enraged feeling.
Non sei mia figlia, dei faraoni tu sei la schiava.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I don't know, people go back and forth with this. I believe there is one slave in the entire opera. And I think that's Aida. Mm-hmm. I think they're prisoners, but I think she is the only one who has actually had to experience slavery in that priest. The father hasn't done that. His people who are with have not experienced that. They've only experienced being captured. So he can't understand how somebody has been in slavery, enslaved, and doesn't want to get out and doesn't want to do exactly what they need to do to get out. So I think there's not a confusion between him and even Rigoletto. He's about his country, and that's it.
Something I love in that role, the whole opera, but especially that role, the lyrics are so beautiful. And it strikes me that someone who is so aggressive and determined and so on speaks in poetry. much of the time.
Yeah.
And that's a key to the role that I don't see people talk about terribly much. They describe him in the sort of autocratic terms we've been discussing. But when he tries to remind her of how beautiful Ethiopia is,
Yeah, yeah.
balsamate, le fresche valli, she repeats those words
Of
because
course.
he makes an impression on her about.
And she hasn't seen it in years.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So but again, I think he is using every tool he has to try to get what he wants. You know, it's almost an Iago type feeling, because he says, oh, listen, you know, we've got this great countryside, and, you know, you just have to remember how beautiful things are. You don't want to be here. You know, we want to get back to that. And it's, I mean, he even uses the fact that he finds out who this lover is. He doesn't just say, oh, you so-and-so, you shouldn't be with that guy. No. He just says, well, listen, how can we use him? You know? So, yeah, it's a very, but his wording about the country and about, it's beautiful. I mean, you almost say, well, now I understand, you know? And there's always something in a Verdi character that lets you see them, you know? I mean, the one thing you see about Iago is in the Credo, is all of a sudden you see this really not very nice person, but you see this dedicated warrior in Amonastro. So his daughter is of course she is a princess. You know, she's not a slave. Why would you want to be anything else?
Now, if I had the chance to go back to see Verdi, and he allowed me to make a second criticism after my telling him that "Non mi tradire" is not a good line, it would also be an Aida. And I adore the opera Aida, but I find flaws in it. And that would be, your character is gone, but if you were to stick around for the end, if Radames and Aida have been lusting after one another, and they're locked up together in this tomb, tu qui in questa tomba, and there's not much air, and they only have a limited amount of time. And I don't mean getting graphic, but what would you do if the person you find to be with, I've seen productions in which they sort of nobly stand holding hands or leaning against one another or leaning against the walls if there are walls, and then gradually maybe slumping down, but they've expended all of their air, so they can't do what they really, really want to do, which is have a Liebestod, so to speak.
Yeah.
And Wagner would have had differently. Wagner would have had them, go up.
Been going at it. Yeah. I think the image of the Egyptian about the afterlife, I think, might play a part of that, because we're still going to be together. You know, there's this life that we're at right now, but we're going to be together in heaven, or wherever they were imagining that. But I think you're right. I mean, if I had a choice between singing,
I agree with you. I've never thought about this very valid thing you say of the Egyptian afterlife. But, it's kind of like when Diana Ross and the Supremes broke up and their last song was "Someday We Will Be Together." Nuh-uh.
Not happening.
Ross is having her own career. And you, Florence and Cindy, go off on your own and do whatever you want. But someday we're not going to be together.
We're not going to be together. But I'm going to be Diana Ross, and we don't know who.
But you're right. Okay, so this is what Verdi would have said to me, and you channeled Verdi beautifully, that yes, the Egyptians had an afterlife.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Something I've been grappling with for decades, and now when people ask me, I will quote you. I will always cite you as the source of that. So, character I want to get to, we can cover all these guys and we can talk about anyone you want, but the opera is Un ballo in maschera. And I adore Verdi, but that opera is not on my list of favorites. I'm happy to see it. I love hearing the opera. I love the music, but it's not the opera that grips me the most. And I know many people who think it's the greatest Verdi opera, that it's perfect and everything, and I don't dispute that. But each one of us is drawn to different works. My favorite Verdis are Don Carlo and Simone Boccanegra, but I love almost all of Verdi.
Right.
But therefore, the operas that I don't really deeply get into tend to be the ones I study more, to try to figure out
Why
what the genius is and how come I'm not getting it and what doesn't touch me. And I think part of it is that I felt that the character of Renato, the baritone who's married to Amelia, who has a chaste affection for Ricardo the king, but never acts on it, and they don't have any physical interaction. And I don't even want to include the backstory about the king preferring Oscar, his page, because that was based on King Gustav III of Sweden, right, who actually was gay and did prefer his page to the women at court. But in this particular version, Renato just seems grumpy. And I've had to really dig into Renato a lot more. And he's grown on me a lot. Would you talk about Renato?
Well, he is kind of grumpy, but he is, however, a loyalist. The thought that his wife would have an affair is troubling, to say the least. The thought that she would have an affair with Gustavo or Ricardo is mind-boggling to him. You know, this is just not possible. And at that point, he becomes a husband who is bent on satisfaction. You know,
as in revenge.
It is in revenge, yeah. And so him having, you know, people say, well, he was talked into, you know, going after Renato, but I don't, Ricardo. I don't think he had to be talked in very much. I think had it not been for the child, he might have actually killed her. So there's a complexity to his character that I think sometimes gets lost because, well, the music is incredible.
Yes,
but there is that feeling that I try to bring to it, that he is a man of honor, and that honor requires, you know, satisfaction. And you know, and I think having thought about it more in his mind, he tells her to go to see her son. Meanwhile, you know, he's like fuming and saying, I'm gonna get this guy, and it's gonna be over. So it doesn't surprise me that he would resort to what he does at the end. You know, but you know that he's conflicted. You know, because he does have a real true love for the king, but you know, it's not the same as in Rigoletto in the Duke. You know, even though that was a king, there was not that love. It was opportunity. But he had a real friendship and love with this man who wound up, you know, doing him a bad thing. It's certainly not as, I mean, there are other Verdi operas that I think one of the best operas that I tend to like, I haven't done, and that's Falstaff. I just think that is just musically the most impressive part of Verdi's writing is Falstaff. But Renato is I think he's still got complexities to him, you know, and I've tried very hard to find all of them. Sometimes not so successful. But
have you done Richard Strauss?
I have not. I learned the oh God, John the Baptist. I learned that, which was probably the hardest music I've ever had to learn.
Yeah,
was that opera, and as I got comfortable with it, they canceled it. So I have never had a chance to perform it.
Because that was one of two roles I was thinking of for you, and there's another role that I would love you in. He's sort of a cousin of Falstaff, but a more, well, we'll talk about him. And that's not Baron Ox, which is what people assume I'm going to say, but Mandrica in Arabella is a fantastic part. And if I were now doing casting, if I were running what I call the ethical grand opera, ego, I would do a production of Arabella and cast you as Mandrica.
Oh, I have to look at it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic role. And your person, the man I know, but also the artist I see on the stage, I think you'd be great at him. And he is, in a way, a cousin of Falstaff. And Richard Strauss and Verdi had a correspondence on several things. And one was that Strauss and Verdi were distinctive because they were better money managers than any other opera composers. And Strauss wrote to Verdi and asked him about how do you manage your royalties and how do you get paid and all those technical things that we do need to know, but many creative artists don't ever get involved in as they should. But Strauss was that way. And then they had a couple of letters that we can find in which Strauss asked Verdi about Falstaff, and Verdi responded. And so when Strauss wrote Baron Ox, Verdi was dead by then. We see some of that in Baron Ox, but we see him in a more refined way because Mandrick is not crude. He's just a country guy. He's not a sophisticated Viennese, but he's not crude either. And we see that more of being cultured and fun-loving and wanting a woman and wanting to be the right man is what is she sings about, the richtige Mann in the opera. And it's when it's well played, it's such a beautiful role. So do look at it. And then the Martina Royo Foundation in about 3 years will stage it. You will sing in one of the productions, one of the cast, you'll sing Mandrica.
You got a deal.
You'll see what I mean. Because actually that would be, it's a very good opera. It's a good length to do. And if you want to expand to German with the foundation, I think that would be a good opera to start with. There are good characters. There's a gorgeous duet. Arabella is a wonderful character. There's comedy, there's pathos, there are loving parents, there is financial hardship among middle-class people because it was written at a time after World War I when many formerly middle-class people in Vienna were trying to keep up appearances but had no money. So part of Mandrica's appeal is that he has money. But Arabella wants the right man, and then it plays out from there. So I look forward to that. I want to talk about Mark Rucker, the educator, because as I said to you, with your sterling reputation, it's not just people who've worked with you in performance, but I've known for years that you are a revered teacher and a revered, I use the word educator because it may be different from teacher because you do management of a program, namely the Martina Royo Foundation Prelude to Performance, but you also are a professor at Michigan State University. I'm going to ask the plainest of plain questions. How do you teach?
I steal a lot from my colleagues. I have, and I kind of jokingly say that, but they're all incredibly gifted instructors and teachers. It all came about because I was in Chicago for Nabucco, and my sister Jane Bunnell called me and said they're looking for a baritone teacher in Michigan State, and I said, well, good for them. She said, you need to come and check this out. Now, if you know Jane Bunnell, you know that it's really hard to say. It's hard to say no to her. So we came and fell in love with the place. And I'd had some experience teaching, but not a huge amount. I would teach some in the summer, and I would teach some at privately, but this in master classes and things like that. But I came here, and the people here just couldn't have been more welcoming to both my wife and I. The first, I have to name some names here because I'm so excited about them. The first that I would say would be Dean Forger. He is the Dean of Music here. There's no more dedicated human being than him. He invited me here and has been a friend and an enormous contributor to the voice department. Then there is my brother in fishing and everything else, Richard Fracker, who's the head of the department. And Richard Fracker is just, what can I say, he's probably one of the finest people I know, and as well as a great teacher, and had been and still is a great tenor. And then we have Melanie Helton, and then we have. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
It's probably somebody trying to tell me I forgot somebody. No. We have the incredible Mark Embry. Mark Embry is aside from being just a wonderful human being and an incredible teacher, is one of the funniest human beings I think you'll ever meet on the planet. And then we have Ann Nispel and Harlan Jennings, and they're our parents, so you have to say Nispel Jennings, who are fabulous human beings and fabulous performers. And then there's Eldon Little, who is our single coach here, actually, who is a master of what he does. I bring all these people up because all of them have been performers. And so we all kind of go that way when we're all thinking about that in our approaches. And I mean, Rick Fracker and Jane Bonnell, of course, been at the Met for years, and all the rest of them have sung in so many different houses. It's not. It'd take too long for me to actually name them all. But my teaching approach is both technically and psychological. I am as positive as I can human possibly be to a student, because I think that's how you help them gain confidence. Yes, you want to work on breathing, you want to work on technically, but my approach is that, but it's also being as much of a positive influence on them as I can be. I have been fortunate that I am very good at picking voices. So it's always a lot easier when you start with a voice that's got talent, you know. But my biggest thing has been the joy that I have gotten in watching the development of my students. And that's actually been much more than I ever thought would be. And so I still perform, but I don't get nearly as much enjoyment out of that as I do working with these kids. And it's been wonderful because I've been somewhat successful here in doing that. I've got some really talented students that I'm very proud of. One of them is out doing a lot of stuff now is Brian Major, a wonderful baritone, and his wife, who I had a chance to work with a little bit, is Michelle Johnson. And one of the things that's going to be really fun is that I've accepted to do an AIDA with Opera Carolina, and the second cast will be Brian and Michelle. Okay. So I'm still looking forward to that. One of the other big things that I got, I think I mentioned having worked with two of our colleagues, two of our former Prelude people. One other joy I got was actually I sang Macbeth also with Opera Carolina, and the young man doing the Banquo was from here. His name was Zyquan Song. He was a fantastic bass baritone who studied with the incredible Richard Fracker. I spent the enormous amount of time on stage. Macbeth is kind of a complicated character, but I spent a lot of time on stage looking at this young man, saying, this is what opera is all about. The young people that we need to have. And he's going to be a wonderful success, I'm sure.
What happens as a teacher, and you can speak for yourself or your colleagues or people you've observed, when you have to deliver some tough love? I will take the example of one of our greatest ever artists, a Kennedy Center Honor winner, although not Miss Arroyo, who I was present at a masterclass she gave, in which the singer said, I think this theater is too big. And the artist replied, I think your voice is too small. And she didn't say that in a mean way, but it was tough love of having to put across a reality that, which the young woman could have disagreed with. She didn't. I think she was a little startled to hear such candor. But on the other hand, sometimes, and I teach, sometimes we have to try to put across a little bit of what we perceive as reality. I know that I always say, in my view, and I would be very happy to be proved wrong, but in my view, this is what I see.
Right.
How do you address that kind of issue?
Tough love for me comes from when I think a student is not doing their best, when I think they're not working, when I think they're not practicing. I don't think I would ever tell a student, no, you're not going to be able to do this. But you definitely won't be able to do this if you don't do these kinds of things. You have to give yourself every chance to do what you want to do. I also tend to tell students sometimes, if you can think of any other job to do and that you want to do, you ought to do it, because this is really tough. This going into this field, if it was that easy, everybody would do it, and everybody doesn't do it. But I've never told a student your voice will never get there, because I just don't. I think it's up to them to make their desires happen. For instance, there was a young lady in Prelude some time ago who she had probably the smallest voice I've ever seen. So she wasn't, it wasn't going to be hers. But what did happen was she became an agent.
Okay.
So she took advantage of what she had. She made it work. So these kids may not all become Martino Royals, but they may become Martino Royal fans. They may become art song singers. They may become all sorts of other things, or stage managers, as my wife said. But I always try to stay as positive with them in that realm. There's always going to be somebody that, gets bent out of shape because they didn't get this competition or that competition, and I'm thinking, well, if you can let yourself be talked out of it because you didn't win this competition, you're in the wrong business. So that's what I will get,
I'm going to pose another situation to you that, again, we're not naming names because that's not the important thing. I was teaching a master class to 6 singers at a very important university in the eastern part of the United States. And I was invited by a baritone colleague of yours and by the head of the music department there. And I said I wanted to do it about Mozart. They had various topics, and I teach Mozart. I don't teach Mozart as much as I teach Verdi, so I thought it'd be interesting to do Mozart. And the 6 young singers were instructed to bring 2 arias each from Mozart. And the tenor showed up and he said, well, I sound better when I sing Una furtiva lagrima from Elisir d'amore by Donizetti, so I'm going to sing that.
Excuse me?
What would you have said, Professor Rucker?
Have a nice day. I mean, that is one thing that if the whole premise is one premise and the person giving the masterclass has dictated that premise, and you come in disregarding that, I said, basta finito. I mean, it's over. Please have a seat, and we'll come back to you when your mind returns.
And I'm not making tenor jokes here at all, but what I said to him was, I mean, number one, Mozart is not esoteric. It's not that I'm asking them to do, I don't know, Monteverdi, which is not that esoteric either, but more challenging in a way than Mozart. But I said to him, you did prepare these two arias. You can sing one of them, but then I'm not going to discuss it with you. So I gave him the opportunity to sing because I was interested to hear his voice. And then talked to him privately after and let him really have it, but privately, not in front of his classmates, and explained to him why what he did was just not acceptable. And I don't use bad language at all, and I didn't, but I think I made it very clear to him that it was a perceived slight to me, number one, although I didn't take it personally. But number two, it shows that he can't follow instructions.
Right.
And if he can't follow instructions, he'll never have a career in opera.
Well, I ran into a situation somewhat close to that, although I didn't realize at the time. This young woman got up at a master class and she said, I'd like to sing Mi chiamano Mimi. And I went, okay. Because this was not the person that I thought probably should be singing that. Because they had originally told me she was going to sing, I think it was Per la Gloria. And she said, no, I'm going to sing this. And I went, oh my God, okay. She started singing, and I spent the entire aria trying to figure a way out of saying, you got to put this away. And I kept thinking about, okay, what can I say to her? And I finally got enough of an idea, and I said, well, look, you sang this as well as you could. But and I asked the audience, what is one of the hardest things about singing Puccini? And they said, well, it's the line. And I said, that's all right, but I think it's the orchestra.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking that Puccini is easy, sing when you have an orchestra that the vast majority of the people that are playing in your range are playing your line, and you have to be heard. So I said, you might want to just take some time and maybe not do this. Well, the tears started flowing. And I said, well, okay, no, then let's why don't you sit down and maybe we'll come back to you. And she said, oh no, I can do it. Oh no, I can do it. I said, oh my gosh. So I let her start again, and she cried away to half of it. And I said, listen, I'm sorry, we can't do this. It's not fair to you. And I want to say it's certainly not fair to me. But master classes are tricky things, I think, because you are listening to somebody that you have never heard before, and you don't know their personality. You don't know what their teacher has said. As a matter of fact, I went to the teacher afterwards and I said, why would you let this child get up and sing this? Mm-hmm. She said, well, I didn't know she was going to sing it. Mm. Well, that's a problem. But anyway, that's I remember doing a master class with Schwarzkopf. And the girl that sang before me had never sung the aria she had decided to sing for Schwarzkopf before she decided to get up and do it today, right?
Let's say that Elizabeth Schwarzkopf was exacting. Is that an acceptable attitude?
That's a good way of saying it. Yes. She, needless to say, when the girl finished, she said, who is your teacher? And the girl announced who her teacher was, and she said, you need to go back and give him his money, get your money back.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God. And of course, who's singing next? Right. So I got up and I did the prologue. And fortunately, she must have felt good because she only corrected one thing in the prologue, and I immediately sat down. But they can be very difficult.
Prologue from Pagliacci, Si può.
Yeah.
Okay. Is Tonio anywhere around?
He is resting over here.
Okay, I saw him go by briefly. Okay.
Can you come and say hello?
Oh my goodness.
He's He's waiting.
Hey, Jude.
Tonio, come on. Come on.
Si può, Tonio, si
Oh my
può.
Yeah.
goodness, it's siesta time.
Antonio,
Tonio, come here.
he's so knocked out. This is his kind of siesta time.
Okay.
But I don't know if you can see him or not.
I can see him perfectly. He's absolutely,
Come on, baby.
he's stolen my heart is all I can say.
I mean,
That's
hold on.
okay.
I'm not turning my back, so
Okay.
Come here.
Tonio.
Hello.
No.
Come
Oh.
hello. Hi.
Hi.
Say hello. Say hello. Say hello.
Mark, I have a suggestion now. He's beautiful. When you do Arabella, when you do Mandrika in Arabella, nothing says that Mandrika can't have a dog.
Oh, yes.
So
Yes.
I'm just casting Tonio in his first role. He is just stunning, is all I can
Yeah.
say.
He's a beautiful
Mark,
guy.
I want to go to one more topic before we say addio alla prossima volta. And namely, that is our beloved Martina Arroyo,
Yes.
who I met in the early 1980s. I had the honor to work with her at the Met in some of her last performances there, including her very last performance as Aida with Grace Bumbry, and it was a thrilling night. And she is, and I am using the word advisedly, she is a magnificent citizen.
Yes.
In addition to everything she is as an artist and a friend and incredibly funny and all that we know about her, she is a magnificent citizen. Would you talk about her from your view?
Oh my gosh. I don't have a dearer friend in the world. And Martina's one of these kind of people that comes along very rarely. She can make anybody calmer. I mean, she can make anybody lose their, anger. Now, I will say that, and I'll preface it by saying she doesn't suffer fools well.
No.
but she is proof that a diva doesn't have to act like the negative term. She is dedicated. She is conscientious about young people more than anybody I've ever known. When she talks about Prelude, or she talks about the foundation, it's all geared on what young people need. Mm-hmm. And she is, I'm sorry that her dear husband, who passed several years ago, Michelle, is not still around, because talk about a loving couple. And so I'm losing words here because I get somewhat emotional when I talk about her. She is devout in studying. She is always a student. She is always looking to see what she's missing. She was here at our school to do a masterclass, and we were just in heaven. Mm-hmm. So I can think of nothing more important in life than what this woman can bring. Obviously, she was a great singer. We all know that. I mean, you can't hear that voice and not know that's who that was, and you not know how in the world does a human being produce that gloriously of a sound and still be this very kind of down-to-earth human being. If nobody says anything about Martina, is that you will come to her sad, and you will leave from her laughing your head off.
Yeah.
And then forgetting that she is one of the world's greatest sopranos.
If it's the measure of her, and this is just one of many, when I've had answering machine messages from her, I never delete them. And so I have 3 or 4 that I have that are wonderful. And if I'm a bit down, I play my answering machine and listen to my Martina messages. That's all I need. So you were talking about Michelle, her husband, and you reminded me of something that I kind of suppressed, and now I'm going to bring it back. she retired from the Met, as I recall, in 1985 or perhaps 86. I remember it was Halloween, which was quite a night to go out on. And but a few years later, in 1993, Martina and I were sort of the talent on a sailing of a ship called the Vistafjord that used to belong to the Cunard Line. And it was an old style ship. It was not one of these modern ocean liners. It was very beautiful. It was very narrow. And in fact, I wrote my book, Opera 101, on that sailing. And she did master classes. I taught, I did lectures. We did things together. I did a conversation with her. And the itinerary was basically sort of New York to London, going to Greenland and Iceland. And basically it was the Flying Dutchman. And the weather for part of it was just horrible. And I tolerate rocking ships, but most people didn't. Even the captain could not, the Norwegian captain. And so I would go up to the bridge and do the announcements on the ship in English and German, in French, and then I would do them in Italian. And the captain said, "We don't have any Italian passengers on the ship." And I said, "I'm doing it for my pleasure." And Martina heard it, and she would say, "Well, you want to work on your intonation in the German here." And this was, as I said, a very narrow, very elegant, beautiful ship. And my room was sort of to one side. And most ships now, all the rooms are more or less identical and have the same amenities. This was done at a time when passengers liked their distinct rooms. And mine had a desk, which was my requirement because I wanted to write a book on this voyage. And I used to go out on the deck in the storms, and the ship would be rocking and swaying and groaning, and we had to cancel a lot of the activities. And because it was Martina Royo and Michelle, they gave her the best cabin, which was all the way at the front of the ship. And there was sort of a porthole, and there were no terraces or balconies on the ship. And because it was the front of the ship, it would, I'm sorry to laugh, smack against the waves. And the most impact that anyone felt were poor Martina and Michelle. And
I can't even imagine.
I didn't want to go visit them because everybody except for me and 3 German women were suffering terribly. But I went and walked and looked into the porthole, and there was Martina, kind of like Manon Lescaut being sent off to the New World with this porthole in her sorry, looking out. And she was a color I'd never seen. So I called her up and I said, "Darling, I just came walking around. I saw you." She said, "Yes, I know, I saw you." And I said, "How are you?" She said, "Honey, in my life, I've been all kinds of colors, but I've never been green." And I said, "How's Michelle?" And she said, "He's whiter than ever." He's lying down. And this went on for 72 hours, this rocking of the ship. And we skipped the ports we were supposed to go to, and all the classes and everything was canceled. And I got up and I went down to the kitchen and I started preparing food. Not that anyone wanted food, for the 3 German women who were very upset that they were not getting everything they were paid for.
Oh, God.
Band, the Filipino musicians couldn't play. They couldn't blow into their instruments. They couldn't, and I would check in on Martina once a day and bring up some broth that I had made. And, poor thing, but everyone on the ship, even the doctor, was too sick. And I don't know if Martina ever took a cruise after that. I've done many.
I just have this image of what worse job could you have than the captain of a ship when you can't take waves?
I know. But, they wanted to honor Martina and Michelle by giving them what is by far the best cabin on the ship, all the way in the front. And if you could just imagine these surging waves coming up to the 10th deck and smacking against the porthole and the ship pounding every 30 seconds. Boom, boom, boom.
So how long were you on the ship?
It felt like 40 years. It was 3 weeks.
Oh my God.
3 weeks, of which we had about 72 hours of just torture, but the rest of it was okay. We managed. But it's the thing that people remember from that sailing if they were on it, because there was just there was no relief at all, and nothing could be done. And the report was that it was going to continue this way, and the captain would try to come on the microphone, and then he'd become very breathless. And so he would write out for me what to read. And ultimately, we got through it. But it was when I have to recreate for people the Flying Dutchman and what that ship is like. I talk about that sailing. Next time you talk to Martina, ask her.
Oh, absolutely.
But this is what the great artists do. The show must go on. And in this case, the show didn't, but everything was canceled.
I would have been one of those.
We did everything that we had promised the audience. We just had to do it in a more compressed time frame.
Oh yeah, I would have been with Martina. We would have been sharing a basket because I'm terrible at high C things. But no,
you don't have. She had a high C.
Got me on that one.
Mark, I must let you go. This has been a delight, and it was wonderful to see Sadie and to meet Tonio. And keep up all of your good work, and thank you really for everything you do. And I think that our audience can understand now why you have such a sterling reputation.
Thank you. I should also mention that I'm still kind of performing. I'm not nearly performing as much because I'm at the school, but I've had a couple of opportunities here. One I did an IDAGIO here recently, and that was very nice. But I also did a piece called Baba Yar, Shostakovich, Baba Yar. And it was talk about being out of my comfort zone. I had not done Russian before. And I remember asking people at the Met to help me, go through this. And I had two people. One was Russian, one was from Ukraine. Completely different pronunciations. Excuse me, no end. So I got back here and worked with a young man named Gennady who was very helpful. And did the performance for a lot of people who I not really knew the piece that well before, but I've had opportunities here to still kind of keep the chops up into war and being good at that. But the IDAGIO was special because I got to work with Maestro David Rail, who conducted that, and he was fantastic. So anyway, but that's why I do want to get that.
Mark, thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Listen, it's great.
Look forward to when the pandemic eases. I don't think it's ever going to fully go away, but when it eases,
I don't
we
either.
live with it in different ways. And
no, we're going to be masked for a long time in my house.
Pardon me?
We're going to be masked for a long time in my house.
I know, but no mask for Tonio. Okay.
Yeah, no, we won't have one for you.
Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend.
Be well. Care. Thank you. Take care.